Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and today we're going to be looking at something that's a little bit peculiar and many people have considered a precursor to the Nintendo Switch, including myself. This chunky monkey, it's not that heavy, I just thought I'd do that for fun. This chunky monkey is called the Wikipad, and it bears more than a striking resemblance to the Nintendo Switch, which I'm about to demonstrate now. But the similarities between these two systems run more than skin deep, which we're about to explore. We're going to be running through what the thing is, its similarities to the Switch, we're going to go through the history of the device, and we're going to look at why we think it kind of didn't do that well, because if you've never heard of it, you can probably assume it didn't do too well. And there may be another bit which I haven't titled properly. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling, let's dive right into this thing. The Wikipad is essentially a mobile gaming device, as is sort of clearly given away by the physical controls that you can see here. And it's got everything that you might expect. Let's have a closer look at it over here. You've got the face buttons, you've got a D-pad here, you've got two sticks like that, and obviously a nice big screen there. You've got like a start and select type thing, and you've also got some nice shouldery bits there as well. And overall, yeah, everything that you would expect from a modern gaming controller is here and present, and it's got a nice big screen that I've turned on. Now, yes, it does just look like a Nintendo Switch, but as I said before, that goes more than just in looks, because this thing has a little party trick very similar to the Switch, in that you can remove the tablet and use it as a tablet. This becomes basically useless afterwards. It's not exactly the same idea as the Switch, of course, but even so, it is a similar idea of sort of removing the controller if you want to. Obviously, the Switch kind of goes in the opposite direction, in the sense that you remove the controller to use the controller, whilst this, you remove the controller to use the tablet. The Switch does have a few things, of course, that allows you to just use the touchscreen and use it as a tablet, but this really is going more with a sort of the tablet-y angle. The tablet itself is a 7-inch affair, which was very common for the time. It has, you know, the standard controls as well, volume up, volume down, power, all that sort of thing. It's got a headphone jack, which is a nice rarity these days, and it also has HDMI out. It didn't come with a dock, but it does come with HDMI out via a micro HDMI cable, which I thought I did, but I don't, so I haven't tested it. And it's already covered in fingerprints. Marvelous. This thing is also rocking a very similar processor to the Switch, although albeit, you know, a couple of generations before at least. It is running an NVIDIA Tegra something. And that results in it being no slouch for a portable device. It's absolutely not the top end or anything like that, but it's more than capable of running more graphical-based things as the Tegra was designed, rather than doing sort of loads of processing stuff. It can be a little bit slow to browse the internet, however, when you're playing games, it does surprisingly well. Although admittedly the games it came with are kind of pants. And these days things like Shadowgun that it came with just simply don't work because the servers just don't want to play ball anymore, which is absolutely fine, and you know, we are playing on it far beyond its life expectancy, but even so, if you're looking at it and thinking, hey, I'd like to play Shadowgun online, forget it. So I mean, realistically, this thing looks like it's going to be pretty good, doesn't it? It looks like it's got a decent amount of power, it looks like it's got decent controls, and overall, it looks like it should be able to at least stand its own ground in the portable handheld market. But it wasn't to be. The system was first shown at CES 2012, and it was shown as a very different unit. It was a $500 10-inch tablet with the same sort of kind of control type thing that you slot it into, and it also contained glasses-free 3D. Many people were impressed with the device and thought that this could be a new chapter in handheld gaming. Even Stan Lee, you know, the Marvel Mega Man, even he famously lauded this thing and said that it was the best thing since Spider-Man.
If you have a game on your PC, you can stream it anywhere in the world and play it on your Wikipad. How about that? Is that great? Wow!
The glasses-free 3D as well was a nice little touch. Maybe wasn't going to set the world on fire, but it was another string to its bow, and obviously very similar to the 3DS in that sense as well. But power was still an issue, because something like this, even in the 10-inch form that it was originally, was not going to have the grunt to play modern games for the time at the latest and greatest settings, which is what they were trying to push. They were trying to say that this is the way that everyone is going to be playing games. So in order to circumvent this limitation, they promised that the Gaikai streaming system would be included with the Wikipad, which essentially was a way to stream games that were running on servers, much like you get with the Switch today with things like Resident Evil 7, but this was back in 2012, which realistically was a very clever way to try and get around the limitations of a device like this, and yet still make it bloody marvelous. In fact, its creators went on to create the Game Vice system, which is very similar, but also Oculus. Yeah. There were, however, a few issues during development, and the 10-inch version that was touted got kind of, well, sort of shrunk, as you can probably tell here, because it moved down to a 7-inch version that retailed for $249.99. Also, there were issues with the Gaikai streaming service, so that kind of disappeared as well. But it's still the same sort of basic idea. Surely if they could get another streaming service, maybe that would work. And they fully intended to get another streaming service running on the system as well. In fact, they succeeded. But that's a story for part 3. When the Wikipad was launched, it wasn't what had been promised. It had been shrunk down and scaled back in order to make it more feasible, and as a result, people lost interest. There was no streaming service as promised, and what games were supported on this thing weren't terribly interesting. There were a handful of vaguely entertaining titles, but realistically, it wasn't what people wanted. Sales weren't brilliant to say the least, and even with endorsements from Stan Lee and the like, it wasn't enough to get it off the ground. However, in 2014, they did manage to secure said streaming service that they promised with OnLive, which, if you know anything about OnLive, maybe not the best decision. Obviously, at the time, they couldn't have known that OnLive would be a big steaming pile of not existing anymore, but yeah. They had a streaming service that did not last long enough to make the Wikipad worth buying, and also it wasn't there at launch. Sales dwindled and the Wikipad was just confined to history, and that's why we're talking about it today. Because in many senses, this is essentially a Switch before the Switch's time, as I've kind of alluded to, and I still genuinely believe that. It holds a lot of things that the Switch has, including, sort of a lightweight form factor, within reason. Obviously this thing's a bit chunky, but it's got all the physical controls that you'd expect from a modern gaming system, in a sort of relatively compact form, with HDMI out, you could use it on the TV, and all that sort of thing. You could use wireless Bluetooth controllers if you wanted, and it was going to have proper AAA games running on it. Obviously you needed an internet connection, but even so, there were a handful of interesting Android titles that you could play when you weren't able to play those things. So why is it that the Switch is the success that it is, and the Wikipad was just confined to the pages of history? Well, let's find out, or at least speculate. So besides the things that the Wikipad inherently got wrong, there are a couple of other factors that I believe means that this just didn't work. For one thing, the build quality is not very good. These are big, shiny, cheap buttons, and I'm still not sure how I keep managing to wake this up. The ergonomics are just wrong. It's not comfortable for use for long periods of time. The controls have a strange sort of Wii U gamepad style layout, and overall just things aren't very well built, especially the shoulder buttons. Oh lordy. Oh, they're not even like clicky and bad. They're just sort of spongy and just terrible. The D-pad is horrible. The battery life isn't fantastic, but of course that didn't stop the Switch. Also, this thing is cumbersome. Look at the size of that thing. Yes, you can just take the tablet with you, but then it's just a tablet. And there are so many tablets that were available at the time that were so much cheaper for pretty much the same thing. You couldn't really just slip this into a bag. I mean, it's hard enough with the Switch, but have a look at the size comparison between the two. I mean, just let alone, you know, the thickness, which is out of this world, but even just, you know, the size, it is just so much bigger than the Switch. Have a look at that, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? You couldn't realistically make this portable either because of the idea of cloud-based gaming, which is fine for when you're, you know, in your home using a Wi-Fi connection, a good Wi-Fi connection in 2012, which, oof. But then if you want to take this out and about and use it as a portable system on the train or something, you can find to using the Android games, and that's where I think this really fell down. The fact is that this thing just doesn't have the games that it needs to survive. There are, I mean, a few handful of interesting games on the Android market that require these kind of things, but realistically, this is one device in a sea of touchscreens. And realistically, are they going to go to the effort to make touchscreen device games work with physical controls for one unit? The answer is no. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, but a system lives or dies on its software. You can have the best thing imaginable. You can have the finest, the biggest rig, the best graphics capabilities you can possibly buy. But if you don't have the software to run on it, it's just a shiny box. The reason the Switch is so successful is not necessarily because of the hardware. It's certainly a perk, but what it comes down to is it has amazing, amazing games on it. And you could argue so did the Wii U, why did that fail? Well, that's a story for another time. It's cumbersome, ugly, sort of weird lump at the back here for some reason, and just overall it didn't inspire people. It had a promise, and sadly, when it was developing, it didn't fulfill it. It's not the device that was shown, it's not the device that everyone got excited about. It's just an Android tablet with some physical controls. It's kind of a shame in a way because I think the idea is solid, because the idea is so similar to the Switch. It's not absolutely the same, however, it is massively similar. You know, a sort of a tablet device with physical controls that you can play games on and take with you wherever you go, and you can remove stuff. Plug it into your TV. But like so many failed guillotines, it's all about the execution. And sadly, they just didn't cut it this time. So that is the Wikipad, a failed system that is kind of interesting in its own regard, but realistically doesn't stand up to today. All it's useful for these days is maybe doing a little bit of emulation if you fancy it. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then why don't you slip that subscribe button into this slot like that, and, and be sure to check out nintendolife.com for all sorts of lovely Nintendo-related content. Thank you again for watching. Bye-bye.